Sorry. Hi, everyone. This is Craig Zelzer from PCDN in Bogota, Colombia this week, not in Medellin, here with Zach Stein, the co-founder of Carbon Collective. This is the PCDN Social Change Career Podcast live stream. This session is sponsored by the Rotary Peace Fellowship, which is one of the world's top fellowships for changemakers. So every year, over 130 people receive full funding to do a master's or postgraduate diploma at one of 8 Rotary Peace Centers around the world. I will share the link, so please check it out. And Zach has been working in sustainable finance and sustainability for quite a long time. He went to university at Hamilton in upstate New York, and he began his post-college career with a fellowship at an urban farm. Then he started working on worm farming, which hopefully he'll share a little bit about in terms of urban worm farming, which led him into aquaponics, which led him to agriculture, and then Osmo Systems. And then in 2020, he set out to build a new climate company, Carbon Collective, which he co-founded with his friend James that he's been connected with since they've been 5 years old. And he lives in the East Bay Area with his wife and son. And so what this session will be like for those watching on LinkedIn, and this will be recorded so you can watch this on LinkedIn or on YouTube, or it will be converted into a podcast episode in the future. And while you're watching, please feel free to message where you're watching from. So feel free to put in the chat box. I'll ask 2 or 3 questions, or I might ask more. And then at any time, feel free to put your questions or comments in the LinkedIn chat box. And then a select number, we'll try to get as many as possible. We'll show them on the screen, and Zach will answer them. So Zach, just to start off, we don't want the Social Change Career Podcast. We really try to talk about how people advance careers of impact in diverse sectors. And so just a simple question, how in the world did you get from worms? And we do compost in our house, but we've tried worms. It hasn't been that successful. Now we have a different system. But how in the world did you get from worms to robo-advising for sustainability?
Totally. I have had a very winding career path. A phrase I really like to say is that life is only linear in the rear view mirror. And so it was a path of learning, kind of just following my nose and where to go from there. So worms, as you said, it led me into the space of sustainability in agriculture, and from there into technology, kind of being in Silicon Valley, and had this moment to be able to take a step back and I had been following this path of kind of what was the next opportunity, and then to be in a place of what do we actually want to build and do next. And we set out not knowing what Carbon Collective was going to be, but knowing that we wanted to build better tools to enable individuals to collectivize their climate actions. And it became clear that finance and investing was this area not only where we needed significant impact, but for individuals in particular, what was available today really wasn't meeting what was needed. So it was a process of discovery and one of learning, and a leap of faith in that.
So one question, how strong were one thing my brother has a great podcast too, so everyone can listen to Zach in multiple forms, that wearepreneurs. And so I listened to that one, and in full transparency, Zach and I are connected. We do angel investing, and I love Carbon Collective. But in that you talked about the mom, I forgot that you talked about the startup book called The Mom Whatever. So I've been reading that. But how did you narrow in on that this Carbon Collective, like the focus on sustainable finance, was the right challenge? And then what professional skills did you have? And then what did you need to develop to better engage?
Yeah. So
hold on one second.
Yep.
Let me just make sure I'm broadcasting. Yeah. Someone said they were having problems seeing us, but I can see us. Okay. No, keep going. Sorry.
Sure. So it was a process of discovery. And I think that was something that we weren't necessarily particularly good at when we launched it. We, kind of being in product world and startup world, we're like, oh, we're going to build this big simulation of like the product that we want to build. And we're going to line up a bunch of people to test it and then see if they like it, if we should build that. And so we put all this time into it. And the first person we interviewed went through it, and it was all these like kind of clickable slides and things like that, and got to the end. It was just like, this is fine, but really you should do the mom test. And we, I think, luckily had the humility to take that feedback. And we read the book. It's super short, and it is a way of interviewing people in which they won't lie to you. And people we like to compliment each other, and it's called the mom test because you could interview your own mother, and she wouldn't say, "Oh, honey, that's such a great idea. I'm sure it'll work," but you'd actually be able to see if she would use this product or not, and whether it is worth building. So we ended up following that process, and I think it is a critical thing to do at the beginning of any kind of entrepreneurial journey, or any journey of saying, answering the question of, should I build this? Does the world actually need this? Does it want that? So we did that. And then we also looked at and zoomed out all the way at the high level of seeing, what do we need to do to solve climate change? And it became really clear, kind of doing the bottom up, that investing for individuals was this place where they had taken the action of looking, and they had gotten blocked again and again and again by being like, this doesn't actually align with the world that we need to build to solve our most pressing issue, in particular climate change. And then looking at from the top down, when it comes to climate change, if we do not significantly ramp sustainable investing, then we are not going to solve it. Climate change is a problem we have to build our way out of, and that takes investment. And if we don't do that, it doesn't matter how many trees we plant or how many vacuums we have sucking carbon out of the atmosphere. We need to transition our society to one that runs without carbon, and that takes significant investment. So it's at the intersection of those two phenomenon that we're like, okay, we need to redefine sustainable investing, and we can have the most power by doing that with individuals. But we didn't know that until we went out and learned it.
Thank you so much. And I can see with StreamYard, there might be a problem streaming to LinkedIn. We talked to StreamYard last time. They said they should be fixed. It may not be. So if you have problems watching us on LinkedIn, go to the YouTube link, and apologies if that happens, but hopefully people can see us. And if for some reason you can't, you can join us later on the podcast or go to YouTube. So apologies for technical difficulties. So one of the questions, in terms of as you better engage in the sustainable finance sector, what do you see as the job functions or the job titles that are increasingly in demand, whether it's for Carbon Collective or somewhere else? And what do you see as the job titles, because automation and machine learning and AI are leading to radical changes in the nature of work. So which bookkeepers, we still need them, but they're kind of changing. Like which jobs are fading away, and which are the ones you see high growth, whether Carbon Collective or in general?
Yeah. I'll take a little bit of a backwards approach to that answer, which is, to us, what's missing in this space is not necessarily like better tech. There's certainly more room for more data and more disclosures of understanding what companies are doing. But what's missing is better stories and narratives of how do we connect the dots, like as a societally, from what do we have to build to solve climate change to where we are today. And then how do we feel educated of what should those priorities be? We, even in our individual lives, struggle with that. We get a lot of people who are like, oh yeah, I'm working on climate change. I use a reusable water bottle. And it's like, okay, like that's certainly better than buying disposables. But in terms of the prioritization of what are more important actions to take to kind of check that box, that's not that high on that list. So having that understanding of what would it mean for companies to do that and governments to do that, I think is really critical here from that lens of sustainable investing. So there's certainly room for people who are in the finance world to come in and grow into that. But I think the place to start is not being like, oh, I need to be an expert on ESG. I think it's saying I need to be an expert on solving climate change, and then take that lens and apply to where we need to go. And you'll be able to then be in a much better place, because ESG, it's a data set. It is not, a pathway in any regards. It's just a way of interpreting the existing world. So the more people that can ground in what is that world, what does a decarbonized world look like, and why is it better in a lot of ways than the one today? It's not just because we avoid climate change. Then that is going to set you up on a really powerful path. And I think be able to have you go through that same process of personal discovery of where is your right path within that. But if we don't start with that, then it doesn't move us nearly as far. And I think it's a lot less inspiring and clear, like where you should fit in.
So a question for those who are, whether thinking about sustainability careers in general or the intersection of sustainability and finance, the world, there's so much need in the world. And so how do you advise people who are like, I just want to do something connected to sustainability, but they don't know where to start?
Yeah.
How do they begin, whether they're in university, grad school, professional with 20 years, what is your advice for people like the world is in crisis? And how do I find the right path to use my skills or develop new skills, whether it's volunteer or paid? Like, where do you recommend people start?
I think, again, this is a place of starting and learning. It is that sinking in of because the beauty or what's great about climate change is that it is a solvable problem. And we have a lot of the technology we need to solve it. And a lot of it makes sense to deploy. It's not one of altruism. So starting with like really grounding in that path. And there are groups like Project Drawdown, the IEA, Rewiring America. There's independent groups that are, bring together the top scientists. The IPCC just came out with a report of what does this path look like. It's become really clear of what our path, our globe is going to need to take to solve climate change. So start with that. And then what I've seen people be really successful with is find something that just really interests you within it. Find a niche. We are all individuals in this world. We cannot solve all of it. And so finding the thing that really brings you to life, and the smaller the niche in some ways, the better. And then especially if it's new or relatively small, you can be in a position to start meeting people in it. You can, I've seen some people, which I thought was really creative. They created a Substack of a space. Like I had a friend who created the biochar Substack, very niche industry. But by doing that, he positioned himself as being able to go talk to everyone in the space and get to know them, and then also be able to really study it at the same time. So that approach I've seen be really successful here. So start with the high level, but then just follow your gut on a learning discovery of what makes you shine within. I have another friend, she's really into fashion. She makes her own clothes, and she's at this intersection of fashion and climate change, and is still figuring out, but she's been able to zoom in increasingly onto that.
So a related question, I mean, I think you and most people would call Carbon Collective a fintech sustainability startup.
Yeah.
So for those who are crazy enough or smart enough or brave enough to either work at a startup or start a startup, and it doesn't only mean for profit, it could be nonprofit, or, what is your advice, both how does someone find opportunities in the startup world connected to sustainability?
Yes. The great thing is, so whether you're looking to start your own startup or join one, is the joining one path is climate tech is absolutely exploding right now. There is a lot of money going into it. There's a lot of innovation and a lot of talent going into it. So I think that there's more opportunities than ever in the for-profit space, especially at these early stage companies, to come in and really help craft from the earliest stages what this is. So that is really that is a place that if you're not looking to start your own or you're not sure, just kind of exploring what that is. And again, I think it can begin with that same process of discovery of what does it take to solve climate change, and then within that, where am I interested? And I think there's just having some level of faith that the right opportunity is going to arise, and whether that's you starting your own or joining someone. I think that's the best attitude to take with that. Of like, not like I absolutely have to start something, but where is just the right place for you, and approaching that from a place of curiosity, I think is going to be the best. Again, the more that you can be in that position of testing and mom testing and discovering and just sinking into it and letting the answer show itself, I think the better positioned you're going to be to not just be much happier in finding work in this space, but also be able to best leverage your specific talents to drive as much impact as possible.
Thank you so much. And again, apologies for the StreamYard challenge. We will try to get this fixed for next time, but you can watch on YouTube and you can watch this later, both on LinkedIn, YouTube, and our podcast. And welcome down, Jim. We have people from Colombia, US, Nigeria, Europe, Southeast Asia, so quite diverse. And thank you, Breen or Carbon Collective, for putting out some great tips. So one question, because Carbon Collective has been growing. So can you talk a little bit about the nuts and bolts of your hiring process? And, if you're open to sharing volume, like do you get 300 applications or 100? And then what applicant tracking system do you use, and what makes an application stand out? Like, are you looking for experience and credentials? And obviously it depends if it's content versus finance versus, compliance, but like a little bit about your application process in general that might be relevant for others.
Yeah, this is an area where we still have lots to learn. So I'll present what we do or what we've done, but not as a like, oh, this is a perfected system by any means. We just wrapped up a hiring process for 2 positions. We ended up hiring the second person that came through the same funnel as the first one. We did post on AngelList. That's actually how we found one of our positions. And for us, it was really important to evaluate for culture fit right off the bat. And so we included we try to design our process I'm going to tell about emojis. We include in our process some tests. So for example, we wanted to test your attention to detail. And so we included in the post, please, as a PS to the email, please include your favorite emoji and why as a PS. So if people didn't do that, they're immediately out because they didn't read the job posting or didn't feel comfortable doing that. And then we also just got to see a little bit of insight into how seriously people took themselves. And for us culturally, if people take themselves too seriously, they would not be a cultural fit with us. And so it was a way for us to evaluate that really quickly. And especially there were clearly some who were not a good fit. And it was a really good signal of who ended up being a really good hire for us.
Did you have what was, not to give away anything too sensitive, but was there the most fun and inspiring emoji, or was there any emoji you were just like, that is and did it have to connect to sustainability, or was just emoji in general?
It was just emoji in general. We had the 2 people we ended up hiring. One was the whale spout, and the other was a sprout, an alien put together, and with explanations of why. And it was just clear in both of those of saying it kind of passed of like, oh, you don't take yourself too seriously, and you're also just able to communicate well verbally in a way that is natural here. Which is really important for us in that evaluation.
So a related question, again, not to give away anything too specific, but AngelList is a great place to find startup jobs, and most of the startup jobs will be in sales, marketing, coding, tech. But if you do, and I think it's free to use, and there's a lot of remote jobs, if you search around, you can find lots of startups on all things sustainability and social impact. But can you just talk in terms of, if you're open to sharing, or in general, like your application process? So they came into your team's, the AngelList platform or wherever else, and
Yep.
Was it, how did you, because generally what employers do is they might get 100 to 1,000 applications, they immediately filter out 90%, and then they look at 10% and get narrowed down to 1 to 3%. So like, what else did you look for in that process? And did you do competency-based testing? Did you do interviews?
Yeah. So we structured our process. We asked them to submit a resume, attach a resume, and a very brief cover letter. Again, explaining, especially for this job, written abilities was really important for it. So we were kind of looking at like, how natural were you seeming? Were you very stiff? Were you kind of flowing? Like we have our brand at Carbon Collective it is real, it is human, but it is also detail oriented. And so striking that balance is really important. And we ultimately are teachers. This is what we do. We say, everyone, we never sell, we only teach in what we do. So that trying to evaluate for that. So the first step was that email. If it looked good and the emoji and all of that, and we have a pretty wide filter for this, we said to people, hey, our next homework is going to be a video explanation. And we gave a few prompts that people could choose through. Again, For this role, ability to explain things well, to teach things well on video is really key because it's a client-facing role. So we get a lot of questions of like, hey, what's happening with this account, etc., like that. And so we actually gave people some prompts that anyone could potentially answer, and then said, please film a screenshot video. We love Loom at Carbon Collective. So we'd say, yeah, it's best remote work tool. And so we'd say, please film a Loom going through this. And so it was a way for us to evaluate how well do you speak? How well can you teach in this? And so, we said, don't worry about editing or anything like that. We're trying to evaluate the kind of off the cuff ability to explain things simply, which is a really critical piece for this role. So then we had a few more interviews after that, a written homework assignment. And then for us, reference checks are incredibly important. We see the goal of the interview process is to tease up any yellow or red flags. And that's what we're digging for. We're trying to ask, why won't this work? In addition to, but really like instead of why will this work? And then the reference checks is to go in and try and dig as much as we can with specifics of, hey, tell me about a time that this person did X, or not just kind of broad. One question that we really like is how on this specific spectrum, how would you rate this candidate in a reference check on a scale of 1 to 10? And then why? And say, why not a 10? What would it take to be a 10? And we find that can also be really illuminating.
So we have about 10 more minutes. And again, feel free to join us on YouTube, put questions in LinkedIn or message me directly if you have them. And thank you, Carbon Collective, for sharing some great things. And LinkedIn doesn't have good emoji functions, but it'd be great to see the emojis. So a question, how did you know when Carbon Collective had the ability, like you did all this user research and found out their pain point was that a lot of people are frustrated because they want to make sure their money is not destroying the world and ideally actually helping the world. But how did you decide like this actually has viability as a business? So what was the turning point between like user research and idea? And then have you bootstrap? And for people who don't know, like the startup lingo, that means like you just build and then you hope to start generating revenue and you grow from that. Thank you for Claudia, and from Colombia, I think. But did you start bootstrapping or you tried to raise capital? Like, for just how do you know that it actually could? And I think it will grow radically. But how do you know from the idea to the user research to actually building?
Yeah. So this is again where the mom test really came in. Is in some ways you don't. It is a leap of faith. And how do you take those iterative steps in building? And so for us, it was, we heard when we started hearing the same thing again and again on from our interviewees about their experience of, I went in, I looked in the ESG fund and I was like, why is this in here? I don't get this. When we started hearing that again and again, it was that to us is indication that something's needed here. And then we set up an ability for some folks to pre-subscribe to it. And when we had enough commitment from that, we're like, okay, this is something that we should go ahead and really start building in. So we tried to kind of very step by step, how do we build the kind of the least amount to get to that next level of conviction in what we're building here. And we are fortunate to live in a time where for us in the investing space, we didn't have to build significant technology to be able to offer a good enough experience on investing with Carbon Collective. Craig, you've seen this, is we work right now, Carbon Collective is hosted on a third-party platform. And it is not as smooth. It doesn't feel as Carbon Collective-y as we would like. And that was a very deliberate choice that we made, is saying, okay, this is just a step of that process of validation. And like, for example, right now we are working on our own software to be able to make that much more the look and feel and bring together that emotional experience of Carbon Collective, which is something we're very excited for. So very much that deliberate iterative approach. And I think especially when it comes to sustainable investing, people often get it wrong. They're like, we need to have great tech. We need to have AI. We need to have like bots and all these things. And it's no, we need to have really clear stories. People really need to understand what they're investing in, why, and transparency and trust, and how does that connect to the big picture? That to us is what is, if you ask, what is the secret sauce of Carbon Collective? What are we trying to do? It's that. We are trying to redefine and educate what does it mean to do sustainable investing.
Okay, so 3 more questions. 1 big question, then 2 about Carbon Collective. So we've had this discussion a little bit, and I have this with a lot of people, Catalina, my partner, PCN and life partner. The amount of money, there's so much capital inequality in the world. And most capital is still seeking maximum return, regardless of the political, economic, or social consequences. And also, most economic theories and systems are focused on growth forever. So the big question, both in relation to Carbon Collective and sustainability, is the climate crisis is so dire, and the amount of money and political capital and just effort really truly doing things sustainably, not greenwashing or half greenwashing, is minimal. Do you think we can, as a planet, actually change and either emphasize degrowth or just ensure every investment or every job or anything sustainability, whether it's someone working in an office or every job has a climate sustainability focus, and any investment, whether government or private, is going to put sustainability at the core. Like, basically, can we move fast enough to meet the crisis, or will we? Yes. And what role does Carbon Collective play in that?
Oh, you should have started that one. It could be the 30 minutes right there. It is a really interesting position of climate change in particular is this interesting conundrum of, you're completely correct, to continue growing even at a 2% annual growth rate, we would far exceed the resources on the planet, let alone the universe in, 1 million years or something like that. So there's this fundamental point where that type of model ends. When it comes to climate change, what is challenging there is there is no path outside of growing our way out of it. We need to reach a society where we are not emitting carbon for running it. There are 2 ways that we get there. We go back to pre-industrial technology, which to us is very unlikely. It's just, I do not believe that people around the world are going to give up air conditioning, especially as our climate is changing. So that leaves only going forward, which means that running the ways that our civilization runs, but doing so without burning stuff. And so for that, we luckily have a lot of that technology today. Solar, wind, and batteries are the cheapest form of electricity in many places around the world. Electric cars are just better. They are safer, they are faster, they are more powerful, they have more storage space. You can charge them at home. They can run for over 1 million miles. They cost way less to maintain, and soon they're going to cost less up front. So when we look at climate change, we see there's a lot of reasons to have despair and not be hopeful. But there's also some exponential factors in our favor in this, where we don't, and I think this is what your question was getting at, is the aspects of human nature that our hyper-capitalistic society, our global society, has brought out in us. And there are many aspects of human nature. But the ones that this has highlighted is greed and the prioritization of self over other. And even if we don't expect a major change in that, there are ways, like with electric cars, like with the transition to renewable energy, where at this point, the finances, we don't need to change that globally. It's just the education of saying, no, this is actually a really good investment. And given the time scale that we're on, that to us gives us a lot of hope, because we don't have to sit back and say, wow, this is just a capitalistic mess. But instead say, yeah, capital will want to follow the best returns. And in some ways, the best returns that are going to be stable, that are deflationary instead of inflationary, are going to be coming from these types of technologies. And more of them are on the way, and there's more research in it. So that gives me a lot of hope. Where I think the question then is very interesting is saying, okay, let's say we in 30 years have reached that decarbonized world, then what? How are we building a circular economy? How are we not just repeating those same mistakes of always saying grow, grow, grow? I don't know. That I think is a much deeper conversation. But right now, it's almost moot to some extent. Because if we don't reach that decarbonized state, then we're going to have a lot bigger problems.
So one very quick story, then the last 2 questions. So we lived without a car for years, and with the pandemic, eventually it just didn't become feasible. I won't go into all the reasons. So we got an electric car because there's no way I'm getting a gas car. Beed, very good car. It's actually the same version of Beed that they use for taxis in Colombia. So we look like grandparents, but it's, And inside of Medellin, it's very easy to travel. We have a charger in our apartment complex, and we came to Bogota last year. There's one charging station between Bogota and Medellin. And then this time we're like calling and messaging and like trying to find out, does it work? And we assume it works. We get there, it doesn't work. And then I make the calculation. I'm like, okay, we got 400 kilometer range. We're going to make it. We have a portable charger. So we drive up the hill, this very steep, long hill, and we go to 2% and the car shuts down. So, and luckily, we called our insurance company. They took a flatbed. They towed us the next charger. But for me, it was humorous. We would have been scared if it was 3 a.m. But it's like there's a lot of PR around infrastructure. And so we've been social media tagging the company saying because they have those beautiful pictures saying, oh, we're going to build this infrastructure for Colombia. Before you start building, whatever works, make sure it's maintained and we can figure, so, and then in Bogota too, it's a hassle to charge. So, and Colombia has a lot of hydro, so the energy here is more sustainable. So it's just, there's such a long way to go. And and we're fine to take that risk, but most people are like, electric car in Colombia, you guys are crazy, So anyway, so my last two questions.
That's where, so if I could respond to that,
Sure.
That is where people who are focused on this, it's so important, that decision, what you made, because for electric cars to scale in Colombia, we need the Craig and Catalinas to say, before this makes full sense, I am doing this to align with my values. And when enough of you do that, then more electric car chargers get put in place and you're sending a signal up the supply chain in the same way that if you chose to buy a gas car, you'd also be sending a signal.
Yeah. But also they need government policy, because we keep seeing malls being built and gas stations. It should be regulation. Anybody who builds anything of a certain size should have to factor in charging. But anyway, so last three questions, quick. So how do people or companies use Carbon Collective currently, or let's say next few years? So you have to be a U.S. citizen, or basically, who is your clientele? And for people who want to get more information, where do they go?
Yeah, so right now, unfortunately, we only can work with U.S. citizens. It is something that we are looking to change in the coming years, but it's just the regulations around investing, for good reason, are quite strict. So we can only work with U.S. citizens. We are going to be expanding that. We are going to be launching ways that other people internationally can go ahead and buy our collection of companies and be able to participate in voting and things like that we do. We also work with companies. So we have a green 401k program for companies that are mission driven here in the US. We found that a lot of our founder friends and folks like that said, hey, we want to help our employees save for retirement, but it's not right now. Every portfolio that we have invest in fossil fuels, and that just runs counter to our mission. So we can come in and actually take on the liability of building portfolios and adding additional options to that mix that are aligned with solving climate change.
Okay. And then what can you talk about assets under management, if that's public, if not? And then what is the vision of Carbon Collective in the next 5 years? And then I'll ask one last question.
Yeah. So right now we have about $20 million under management. This is public information. We posted on the SEC's website. And that's in combination with our individual accounts and our 401ks. We've been growing really steadily, which has been pretty exciting with that. And we have a lot more in the works there. For us, when we zoom ahead and look into the next 5 years, our mission at Carbon Collective is, how do we redefine sustainable investing? And the only way we do that is bottom up. It can't be some top down of some really rich person who's just like, yeah, this is what this is. That doesn't work. It has to be bottom up, and it has to be accessible, and it has to cost the same as what you pay for elsewhere. So to us, in 5 years, what success will really look like is when students are pressuring a university and saying, we need to divest from fossil fuels. And that endowment says, okay, we're going to do it. But the students are not just saying we need to divest, but then, because right now it's a question mark, where does that money go once it's been divested? And for us, if it goes and is managed with Carbon Collective, or it is managed in ways, in models that Carbon Collective has proven and shown to the industry of this is what sustainable investing is, that will look like huge success to us. When BlackRock copies what Carbon Collective is doing, because we've been that successful, that is going to be huge for us and actually align sustainable investing with the world where we solve climate change. That is our mission of what we're trying to do.
And I'll just say at PCDN, we're doing more and more work on finance for changemakers. And, Zach and I were talking previously is that if you have any excess capital, if you're fortunate, to have any retirement funds or $10 a month or $1,000, where you choose to invest that money not only has a huge impact, in your personal financial security, which is one thing, but also the planet. But it's also so important to look at where the money's parked and fees. And most of the ESG, environmental social governance things we see, the fees are insane. Often they're 1% to 2%, sometimes 0.5%. So you've got to look at that overall. And this is just endorsement of Carbon Collect. Their fees are generally 0.35, so less than 0.5%, and transparent. So last question before we have two parts of the question. First, are you going to potentially be hiring more? Second thing is, what are you currently learning yourself, like a skill set that you're working on? And third thing is any other resources or information you would encourage people to look up. Project Drawdown's amazing. Robert Downey Jr.'s Footprint Coalition, but any other favorite resources just for people to impact alpha? But where else do you recommend people go?
Absolutely. Let's start there. I really like how Rewiring America and that group discusses climate change. For them, and this is an area of where do you make personal impact, is some of the biggest places are these one-time decisions. What car am I buying? I'm replacing my water heater. I need to get a new stove. If you do that and you do something that's using fossil fuels, you're locking in 10 years of emissions there. I had a friend where she was going to buy a new car, and I ended up convincing her to lease an electric car. And that to me was incredibly satisfying. Because I was that was 10 years of burning gasoline that I just have helped her avoid with that. And so that is really impactful. So I think that is a framework that when it comes to individual actions, we really encourage people to take of how do you focus on the one-time big decisions that once you do it, you can actually put down like you did with your car, Craig. Remind me of your other two questions.
So the other two is, what are you any things you're currently working on learning, and then just do you see yourselves hiring, in the future, near future?
Yeah, we are just right now done with hiring for at least the next couple of quarters. We're going to see. We might be bringing on another investment analyst role in the second half of the year. We'll be seeing that. And in terms of what I'm learning right now, the beauty of being an entrepreneur and being in this space is that you're constantly learning because you have to. And so one of the things I'm really working on is how do we increasingly just tell this story more simply and better and make it accessible. And so, opportunities like this, even to come out and talk and share, is that opportunity to refine of how are we helping folks be really clear. We just came out today with something called the Ultimate Guide to Sustainable Investing. And that was a really big piece of content where we start by saying, why is investing critical for solving climate change? And then we say, why is your retirement account, how do we connect the dots to there of where that impact is? And then we look at the existing options, ESG, those breakdowns. We show what is when we look at the other ESG or sustainable SRI portfolios that are out there from other online wealth managers, what percent of them is fossil fuels? What percent of them are climate solutions companies? So we think it's a pretty helpful resource. So that's been a huge amount of learning that kind of came through that of how are we best telling these stories and counteracting some of the prevailing narratives that we don't always realize are underneath the surface of, especially in the world of investing, where fossil fuels is seen still in many circles as a necessary evil in part of a balanced portfolio. And that has just not been true. Since the year I was born in 1989 until the present, the S&P 500 divested of oil companies would have performed better over that period of time. And so that is the type of narratives that by challenging them and by challenging the narrative that to invest sustainably is fundamentally a charitable act, you are accepting lower returns. That fact that is a prevailing narrative limits people going into sustainable investing. It becomes somewhat of a self-fulfilling prophecy when we can look at the macroeconomics and actually point to and make, I believe, a fairly strong argument that over the coming decades, it's a much smarter way to invest. Those are the types of things that we're working on. How do we better tell those stories, and where we think that Carbon Collective's voice in this space could be really helpful.
So thank you so much for building Carbon Collective with James, sharing your wisdom, taking time today. And again, I think for anyone looking for short-term investment, you can even make a lot of money short-term investing. I don't do that, but I do think for the sake of the planet's more important than anybody's money. But I think if you're trying to think about financial well-being of institution, individual, company, like sustainability has got to be at the heart of it. And Carbon Collective, and there's others, but really does amazing work. So please check them out. And if you work for a small nonprofit or company where they don't have good transparency or accessible things, get in touch and start advocating, because that's another thing you can do as an employee and say, like, your offerings are horrible. And I've seen that many times. And you could say, it doesn't have to be Carbon Collective, but here are some places to look. And thank you to Rotary for sponsoring this, and everyone for listening, and apologies for the issue with StreamYard. I will get in contact with them. You can, we had about 150 people registered, people came on. So you can watch us on YouTube. The podcast will be up soon, and this video will be on LinkedIn immediately. So thank you, James, for sharing your experience, and Breen or whoever's at Carbon Collective sharing, and everyone for watching, and stay tuned for another episode.
Thank you so much for having me.